So the goal of the program is to introduce people to the benefits of logic modeling. What's wrong with this statement? You can pause as long as you would like in the webinar if you want to talk about or you want to think about the answer to this question. So here's my thinking. I recognize that this goal isn't stated in terms of the outcomes for the participants, but rather the intentions of the program. We still don't know how are the participants going to change as a result of this program. It's also kind of vague in terms of who the people are and what do we mean by logic modeling or benefits or what kind of program it is. So here's a somewhat better example. Why is this better? And where are the lacks still inherent in the way this is stated? Again, pause for discussion or for reflection, and go ahead when you're ready. So, I'm thinking that still the evaluation questions that come of this focus on program execution and whether the program did what it promised that the program will provide, but it doesn't really talk about what the participants will do as a result of their participation. Finally, and this is not a perfect outcome statement, but it's vastly improved over the other two, so what's better in terms of SMART outcome statements? And what's still lacking? How could it be improved? So here's the big deal. This outcome statement does what it's supposed to. It states the goals in terms of the participants, what they are going to be able to know, feel, and do. It should be noted that especially the last part, that having to do with developing SMART outcome statements for a professional development program of their own, will need to be followed up later, and if they apply this learning in their own programs, it will need to be assessed later. So here's an opportunity for you to do some generative work. Think about a program that you're in the process of developing or that you recently implemented, and you can look back at your notes. This is open book. And also, what you prepared for this webinar, write out at least 3 outcome statements. Think about the domains, although you don't need to address each one in terms of knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, and skills, and be SMART. Specific, measurable, achievable, results-oriented, and timed. Take your outcome statements and share them with others who perhaps are taking this webinar with you, and get their constructive feedback, or introduce them to the idea of SMART outcome statements, and then work together to constructively improve the statements that you've created. think about any questions or comments that you might have, and feel free to communicate with us at JESNA via email or by phone. You can reach me at lisaacs, L-I-S-A-A-C-S, at jesna.org. So the third in our series of webinars will go from outcomes to indicators. Now, theoretically, that you know where you're heading because you've defined success and you've stated outcomes in measurable terms, we're going to talk about how you get there and how you will know that you got there. This webinar will take place on January 5th, 2010. Incorporating input from participants' real-life experiences, the session will cover how to create a logic model that can help you in planning, implementation, and evaluation. We're going to talk about inputs, outputs, and tie that in with outcomes. We touched on this in the first webinar, and we will go deeper in this next one. And then we will focus a great deal on techniques and tools that you can use to document, monitor, and measure inputs, outcomes, and outputs and outcomes. And finally, we will talk about how you can use the data that you collect for a variety of evaluation purposes, including formative evaluation to include a program, to improve a program, summative evaluation to assess achievement of outcomes, process evaluation and implementation evaluation to understand better how you're doing what you're doing, whether you're doing it well, using it for marketing purposes, using the data for communication purposes. In advance of the next webinar, please prepare by completing the first 3 columns of the evaluation planning workshop that was presented in the first webinar series, because we will be going back to that chart and completing the following columns in our upcoming webinar. The worksheet includes columns in which you summarize the focus of the program, what it's about, what the outcomes are, which we've already worked on, identify evaluation questions. What is it that you're going to want to know about the program and about the outcomes? In the next session, we're going to talk about indicators, benchmarks, and mile markers, how those can be assessed using various tools, who should provide the data, and how you communicate and act on the findings. Thank you very much for your participation, and I look forward to hearing from you in a variety of ways about the usefulness of this session.